I never thought that falling in love would destroy my entire life. But here I am, 28 years old, sitting in this empty church, holding a ring worth more than I'll ever make. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, he lied about everything. Everything I thought I knew about him was a complete fabrication. But let me take you back to where it all started. 6 months ago, in Austin, Texas, at Sullivan's Auto Repair, where I work as a mechanic. My name is Madison Clark. I've been fixing cars for 10 years, ever since my grandmother Grace taught me that honest work is God's work. That's when he walked in my life. Andy, he said his name was. Just a regular guy who needed his car fixed. Or so I thought. There was something different about him. The way he looked at me, like I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, grease stains and all. He kept coming back. Different excuses, small repairs. Always humble, always kind. Always insisting on buying me coffee during my breaks. We started dating. Simple dates. Diners, walks in the park, nothing fancy. He said he was a freelance consultant. I believed every word. He won over my grandmother Grace immediately. She said she'd never seen me so happy. She was right. I was happier than I'd ever been. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. This humble, caring man was everything I'd ever dreamed of. But I had no idea who he really was. The day of our wedding, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I was marrying the man of my dreams in my grandmother's church. That's when she showed up. Jennifer Walsh. With cameras. With reporters. With the truth that would shatter everything. Andrew Mitchell. Not Andy the consultant. Andrew Mitchell, CEO and founder of one of the biggest tech companies in America. Worth $3 billion. The cameras wouldn't stop flashing. The questions wouldn't stop coming. He tried to explain, tried to tell me he was going to reveal everything after the wedding. But all I could think was, everything was a lie. I ran. I ran from the church, from the cameras, from him. The man I loved didn't exist. It was all an elaborate deception. The media destroyed me. Called me a gold digger, a manipulator, a fraud. People who didn't even know me decided I was the villain. I lost customers. Friends turned their backs. Even some people at church whispered behind my back. My simple life was ruined. But now, 3 months later, I'm discovering things that don't add up. Things that make me question everything I thought I knew about Andrew Mitchell. Because what if the man I fell in love with was real after all? What if the lies he told were hiding something deeper than greed or deception? Before I tell you what I discovered, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or state in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more incredible stories of love, faith, and forgiveness. Let me start from the very beginning. My name is Madison Clark, and I've lived in Austin, Texas my entire life. This quiet neighborhood has been my home for 28 years, where everyone knows everyone, and life moves at a comfortable pace. The kind of place where neighbors still wave from their porches and kids ride bicycles until the streetlights come on. It's simple, honest living, exactly the way my grandmother Grace raised me to appreciate. But I had no idea how much this peaceful life was about to change when a mysterious stranger walked into Sullivan's Auto Repair on that ordinary Tuesday morning. I lost my parents when I was just 16 years old. Car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. One phone call changed everything. Mom and Dad were coming home from their anniversary dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light. The police officer who came to our door said they died instantly, that they didn't suffer. But I suffered. For months, I couldn't understand why God would take away the two people who loved me most. I was angry, lost, and completely alone in the world. That's when my grandmother Grace stepped in and saved me from drowning in my own grief. She didn't just take me in, she helped me rebuild my entire life from the ground up. Grandma Grace was unlike any woman I'd ever known. She could fix anything, cars, appliances, broken hearts. At 72 years old, she still changed her own oil and rotated her own tires. She taught me that honest work honors God, and that a woman should never depend on anyone else to take care of her needs. Madison, she'd say while we worked on her old Chevy, your hands are your greatest tools. Learn to use them well, and you'll never go hungry. She showed me that strength isn't about physical power. It's about determination, independence, and the courage to face whatever life throws at you. Those lessons shaped everything I became. That's how I ended up at Sullivan's Auto Repair when I was 18. Tom Sullivan was a friend of my grandmother's from church, and he gave me a chance when nobody else would. His shop had been serving Austin for 30 years, with a reputation built on honest work and fair prices. The building might have looked old and weathered from the outside, but inside, it was filled with state-of-the-art equipment and the wisdom of decades of experience. Tom saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself, potential. He believed that with enough hard work and dedication, I could become one of the finest mechanics in Texas. Looking back now, I realized that job saved my life in more ways than one. Tom became like a father to me over the next 10 years. He taught me everything: how to listen to an engine's rhythm, how to diagnose problems through intuition as much as instruments, and most importantly, how to treat every customer with respect and honesty. Madison, he'd say, treat every customer's car like it's your grandmother's, and you'll never go wrong. He was patient when I made mistakes, encouraging when I doubted myself, and proud when I succeeded. Under his guidance, I transformed from a grieving teenager into a confident, skilled professional. Tom didn't just teach me about cars. He taught me about integrity, perseverance, and the value of building something meaningful with your own hands. By the time I turned 28, I had become one of the best mechanics in Austin. Word spread throughout the city that Madison Clark could diagnose problems other shops missed. I took pride in my reputation, in my independence, in the life I'd built with my own two hands. Customers would specifically request me for their most challenging repairs. I could hear what an engine was telling me, feel what was wrong through vibrations, and fix problems that had stumped other mechanics for weeks. My expertise wasn't just technical, it was intuitive. I loved the satisfaction of solving puzzles, of bringing broken things back to life, of earning honest money through skilled work. I thought I had everything figured out, that my simple, predictable life was exactly what I wanted. My life was beautifully simple. I lived in a modest apartment just 10 minutes from the shop, attended church every Sunday with Grandma Grace, and spent my evenings reading or working on my own car projects. I had a small circle of close friends, enough money to pay my bills and save a little each month, and a deep sense of satisfaction for my work. Romance hadn't been a priority. I'd dated occasionally, but nobody serious. I was content with my independence, my predictable routine, and my quiet happiness. I thought this was my story. The orphan girl who overcame tragedy to build a stable, meaningful life. I never imagined that everything was about to change when a man with deep blue eyes and gentle smile walked through her shop doors, carrying secrets that would turn my entire world upside down. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Tom was already at the shop when I arrived, coffee brewing and work orders spread across his desk. We had a full schedule: routine maintenance, a transmission rebuild, and a mysterious noise complaint that had 3 other shops stumped. I was reviewing the day's priorities when I heard a car door slam outside. Looking up through the window, I saw him for the first time. A man in his 30s, dressed simply in jeans and a plain t-shirt, standing next to an old sedan that had definitely seen better days. There was something different about him, the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his posture. He seemed almost too refined for the beat-up car he was driving, but I dismissed the thought. People's circumstances change, and you never know someone's story from appearances alone. When he walked into the shop, our eyes met immediately. "Good morning," he said, and his voice was warm, educated, with just a hint of nervousness. "I'm hoping you can help me. My car's been making some strange noises, and I'm not sure what's wrong." I introduced myself as Madison and asked him about the symptoms. As he described the problem, I found myself studying his face: intelligent blue eyes, genuine smile, hands that looked like they belonged to someone who worked in an office rather than manual labor. He said his name was Andy, that he was new to Austin, and that several people had recommended Sullivan's as the most honest shop in town. There was something magnetic about him, a sincerity that made me want to trust him immediately. I took his keys and popped the hood of his sedan. The car was old but well-maintained, which told me something about his character. As I examined the engine, he stood nearby, asking thoughtful questions about what I was looking for. Most customers either hover anxiously or disappear entirely, but Andy seemed genuinely interested in understanding the process. "You really know what you're doing?" he said, watching me test various components. His appreciation felt authentic, not condescending like some men who seemed surprised that a woman could understand engines. I diagnosed the problem quickly, a worn belt tensioner that was causing the noise. It was a simple fix, maybe 30 minutes of work. But something about this man made me hope he'd stay longer. There was an energy between us that I hadn't felt before, a connection that seemed to spark from our very first conversation. And he started coming back to the shop regularly after that first visit. Always with small issues, a squeaky brake, a loose mirror, a dashboard light that wouldn't turn off. Problems that any mechanic could fix in minutes, but he always specifically requested me. "I trust your expertise," he'd say with that genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. At first, I thought he was just being a loyal customer, but there was something in his eyes, the way he lingered after I finished the work, that suggested he had other reasons for returning. Tom noticed too, giving me knowing looks whenever Andy's car pulled into the lot. "That man's not just here for car repairs," he'd whisper with a grin. During one of his visits, Andy asked if I'd like to grab coffee during my lunch break. We walked to a small cafe down the street. Nothing fancy, just a local place where working people gathered. As we talked, I found myself completely captivated by his conversation. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my life and work. He asked about my grandmother, my dreams, my experiences growing up in Austin. Most men I dated wanted to talk about themselves, but Andy seemed fascinated by my stories. He told me he was a freelance consultant, traveling frequently for work, which explained why I'd never seen him around town before. Everything about him seemed so humble and down-to-earth. Our coffee breaks became regular occurrences, then extended to walks through Zilker Park after I finished work. Andy knew surprising details about Austin's history, could recommend hidden restaurants and quiet spots I'd never discovered despite living here my entire life. He was well-traveled and educated, but never made me feel inferior about my simpler background. Instead, he seemed genuinely impressed by my mechanical skills and independent spirit. "I've never met anyone like you, Madison," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from Lunef Point. "You're so real, so genuine. Most people I encounter are putting on some kind of act." His words touched something deep in my heart. When Andy finally asked me on a real date, I said yes without hesitation. He took me to a small diner on the east side of town, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and homemade pie. It was perfect, unpretentious, comfortable, exactly my style. Over dinner, he told me more about his work as a consultant, helping businesses improve their operations. He was vague about specific clients, saying he'd signed confidentiality agreements, which seemed perfectly reasonable. We talked for hours about everything: books, movies, faith, family, dreams for the future. I felt like I could tell him anything, share my deepest thoughts and fears without judgment. By the end of the evening, I knew I was falling for this mysterious, humble man. After we'd been dating for 3 weeks, I decided it was time for Andy to meet Grandma Grace. I was nervous. Grace had strong instincts about people, and her approval meant everything to me. When I brought Andy to her modest house for Sunday dinner, I watched carefully for her reaction. Grace welcomed him warmly, inviting him into her kitchen where the aroma of pot roast and fresh biscuits filled the air. She asked him direct questions about his family, his work, his intentions with her granddaughter. Andy answered everything honestly and respectfully, even helping her set the table without being asked. I could see Grace studying him, evaluating his character the way she'd taught me to evaluate a car's engine. During dinner, something beautiful happened. Andy asked Grace about her late husband, my grandfather who'd passed when I was 12. As she shared stories about their 50-year marriage, Andy listened with genuine interest and respect. He asked thoughtful questions about Grandpa's work as a carpenter, about their courtship during World War II, about the lessons they'd learned about love and commitment. Grace's eyes lit up as she talked, clearly delighted to share these precious memories with someone who truly cared to hear them. Your grandfather would have liked this young man, she told me later, and I knew that was the highest compliment she could give. Andy had won over the most important person in my life. What I didn't know was that Andy was struggling with his own internal conflict during those early weeks of our relationship. Every night after our dates, he would return to his real life, a world completely different from the simple existence he was presenting to me. He would sit in his expensive apartment, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success, wrestling with the growing web of lies he was weaving. The longer our relationship continued, the deeper his deception became, and the harder it grew to imagine revealing the truth. He was falling in love with me just as deeply as I was falling for him, but he was terrified that the real Andrew Mitchell would destroy what we were building together. By the end of our first month together, Andy and I had become inseparable. We spent every free moment together, him picking me up after work, taking long drives through the hill country, sharing quiet dinners and deep conversations. He fit so perfectly into my simple life, appreciating things like homemade meals and Sunday church services. He never pressured me for anything physical beyond gentle kisses and holding hands, showing a respect and patience that made me trust him completely. I found myself imagining a future with this wonderful man, marriage, maybe children, growing old together in the same peaceful way my grandparents had. Everything felt so natural, so right, so blessed by God. When I invited Andy to attend church with me and Grandma Grace, I held my breath waiting for his response. Many men I dated found excuses to avoid religious services, but Andy accepted immediately. That Sunday morning, watching him sit beside me in the same pew where I'd worshipped since childhood, I felt a deep sense of completeness. He participated genuinely in the service, singing hymns with a beautiful voice I hadn't known he possessed, listening intently to Pastor William's sermon about finding God's purpose in unexpected places. After service, he spent time talking with other congregation members, showing genuine interest in their lives and stories. Grandma Grace squeezed my hand during the final prayer, whispering, "This one's special, Madison. I can feel it." As I lay in bed each night during those early weeks, I would replay every conversation, every touch, every shared laugh with Andy. I had never felt so understood, so cherished, so completely myself with another person. He saw beauty in my grease-stained hands and my simple dreams. He laughed at my stories about difficult customers and celebrated my small victories like they were major achievements. For the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they talked about finding their soulmate. Andy wasn't just someone I was dating. He felt like the missing piece of my heart, the answer to prayers I hadn't even known I was praying. I was falling deeply, completely, irrevocably in love with this humble, mysterious man who had walked into my life and changed everything. The morning after Andrew's proposal, I rushed to Grandma Grace's house, practically floating with happiness. When I showed her the ring, her eyes widened at its obvious value, but she quickly focused on my glowing face instead. "Oh, Madison," she said, pulling me into a warm embrace. "I haven't seen you this happy since you were a little girl on Christmas morning." We spent the entire morning planning the wedding, a simple ceremony in our family church, with reception in the fellowship hall. I wanted everything to be humble and meaningful, just like our relationship. Grace suggested we invite about 50 people, mostly family, friends, and church members. "This is going to be the most beautiful wedding our little church has ever seen," she said, squeezing my hands. Neither of us could have imagined the chaos that would soon destroy these precious plans. Planning our wedding felt like the most natural thing in the world. Pastor Williams was delighted to perform the ceremony, and the church ladies immediately volunteered to help with flowers and food. I wanted everything simple but elegant. White roses from Grace's garden, homemade cake, and a string quartet from the church youth group. The total budget was modest, which suited me perfectly. I had never been the type to dream of expensive weddings with hundreds of guests. All I wanted was to marry the man I loved in the place where I'd learned about God's love, surrounded by the people who had shaped my life. Andrew seemed perfectly content with every simple detail I suggested, which made me love him even more. He appeared to understand that our love didn't need expensive displays to be meaningful and beautiful. While I was planning our humble wedding, Andrew was facing an impossible dilemma. He wanted to honor my vision for a simple ceremony, but he also knew that once our engagement became public, his world would intrude whether we wanted it or not. He sat in his executive office, looking at two different realities: the small church wedding I was planning and the elaborate affair his social and business obligations would normally require. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from business associates, board members, and social contact who would expect invitations to the wedding of Andrew Mitchell, billionaire CEO. But the guest list I was creating included Tom from the auto shop, Mrs. Henderson from the church choir, and neighbors who had watched me grow up. These two worlds seemed impossible to reconcile, yet he couldn't bring himself to shatter my happiness by revealing the truth. Marcus had reached his breaking point with Andrew's deception. "You have to tell her before the wedding," he insisted during an emergency meeting in his law office. "Once you're married, this becomes so much worse. She's planning a wedding for 50 people, Andrew. What happens when 300 business associates show up? What happens when the media finds out? You're not just lying to her anymore. You're setting her up for public humiliation." Andrew paced the office, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know you're right," he admitted. "But how do I tell the woman I love that our entire relationship has been built on lies? How do I explain that I've been deceiving her for 6 months? She'll never forgive me. Marcus, I'll lose her forever." But Marcus shook his head grimly. "You're going to lose her anyway. The only question is whether you lose her with some dignity intact, or in the worst possible way." Meanwhile, in a world I knew nothing about, Jennifer Walsh was having dinner with her wealthy social circle when someone mentioned seeing Andrew Mitchell with some local girl around Austin. Jennifer had been Andrew's on-and-off girlfriend for 2 years, a relationship built on mutual social convenience rather than genuine affection. When she realized Andrew was seriously involved with someone else, her pride and possessiveness ignited into something dangerous. "Some mechanic from garage," one of her friends said with obvious disdain. "Can you imagine? Andrew Mitchell dating someone so ordinary." Jennifer's smile was cold and calculating as she absorbed this information. She had always assumed Andrew would eventually marry within their social circle, probably to her. The idea that he was choosing some working-class nobody over sophisticated, wealthy Jennifer Walsh was an insult she couldn't tolerate. Jennifer's wounded pride quickly transformed into a calculated plan for revenge. She hired a private detective to investigate everything about Madison Clark: her background, her family, her relationship with Andrew. "I want to know everything," she told the investigator, sliding a substantial check across his desk. "Where she lives, where she works, who her friends are, how long this has been going on. And I want photographs, lots of them." Her plan was beginning to form. If Andrew wanted to slum it with some nobody mechanic, she would make sure the entire world knew about it. She would expose his ridiculous charade and humiliate both of them in the most public way possible. In her twisted logic, if she couldn't have Andrew, she would make sure this Madison person couldn't have him either. Completely unaware of the storm brewing around us, Andrew and I continued our wedding preparations with pure joy. When we went shopping for wedding attire, Andrew insisted on paying for my dress, which was more expensive than I would have chosen, but still modest by most standards. He looked so handsome in his simple black suit, and when the tailor asked about his measurements, I noticed Andrew seemed familiar with the process, as if he'd been fitted for expensive suits many times before. "You clean up pretty well for a consultant," I teased, and he laughed, but I caught a flicker of something guilt in his eyes. These small inconsistencies were starting to add up, but I was so happy and in love that I dismissed them. I trusted Andrew completely, and besides, everyone has aspects of their past they don't discuss immediately. I assumed I would learn all his secrets after we were married. The church community rallied around our wedding with heartwarming enthusiasm. Mrs. Patterson volunteered to make the cake. The youth group offered to provide music, and several families promised to bring dishes for the reception. This was what I loved most about our close-knit community. When someone had a celebration, everyone contributed to make it special. Andrew seemed genuinely moved by the generosity and warmth of people who barely knew him, but welcomed him as family because he was marrying me. "I've never experienced anything like this," he told me one evening after a planning meeting. "In my experience, people usually have ulterior motives for their kindness. But these people are helping us just because they care." His observation made me realize how cynical his past experiences must have been, which made me even more grateful that God had brought us together. 2 weeks before our wedding, Andrew and I walked through the church sanctuary one final time to confirm all the details. The space was small and simple, with wooden pews that had welcomed generations of worshipers and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across the floor. "This is where I want to promise to love you forever," I said, squeezing his hand as we stood at the altar. "This is where my grandparents were married, where I was baptized, where I learned what real love looks like through God's grace." Andrew was unusually quiet, and when I looked at him, I saw tears in his eyes. "Madison," he said softly, "there are things about my past, things I should have told you before now." My heart skipped with worry, but before he could continue, Pastor Williams arrived to discuss the ceremony details, and the moment passed. I convinced myself that whatever he wanted to share could wait until after our honeymoon. 3 days before our wedding, Jennifer Walsh received the final report from her private investigator. The folder was thick with photographs, background checks, and detailed surveillance notes about my daily routine. Jennifer studied every image with growing satisfaction. Pictures of me in my work coveralls, Andrew and me at humble diners, our visits to Grandma Grace's modest house. "Perfect," she murmured, especially pleased with photos showing the obvious love and intimacy between Andrew and me. The deeper his genuine feelings appeared, the more devastating his public humiliation would be. She had already contacted several gossip columnists and entertainment reporters, promising them the exclusive story of the year: billionaire tech mogul Andrew Mitchell's secret romance with a small-town mechanic. Her plan was set for maximum impact. She would strike on our wedding day itself, ensuring that our most precious moment would become our most devastating public nightmare. The morning of my wedding dawned absolutely perfect. Clear blue skies, gentle spring breeze, and sunshine streaming through the church windows like God's own blessing on our special day. In the small bridal preparation room, Grandma Grace helped me into my wedding dress, her experienced fingers working the tiny buttons with loving care. "You look just like your mother did on her wedding day," she whispered, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, and so happy that you found a man who loves you the way your father loved her." I felt radiant, complete, surrounded by the overwhelming sense that this was exactly how my life was meant to unfold. Every detail felt blessed, from the wildflowers Grace had picked from her garden to the simple pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. I had never felt more beautiful or more certain about anything in my entire life. The church was filling with exactly the people I had hoped to share this moment with: Tom and his wife in the auto shop, neighbors who had watched me grow up, church families who had supported me through my parents' death and celebrated my achievements over the years. Mrs. Patterson had outdone herself with a 3-tiered cake decorated with real roses, and the fellowship hall looked beautiful with simple white linens and mason jars filled with wildflowers. Everything was exactly as I had dreamed: intimate, meaningful, and filled with genuine love from people who truly cared about Andrew and me. As I peeked into the sanctuary, I saw Andrew waiting at the altar in his simple black suit, looking nervous but radiantly happy. Pastor Williams stood beside him with the same gentle smile he'd worn when he baptized me years ago. This was my community, my church, my perfect wedding day about to begin. Just as the organist began playing the processional music, the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the church. Through the stained glass windows, I could see several black SUVs and a van with satellite equipment on top. My heart began to race with confusion and fear as car doors slammed and voices began shouting outside. "What's happening?" I asked Grandma Grace, who had moved to the window with a worried frown. Before she could answer, The church's front doors burst open with a force that seemed to violate the sacred space itself. Jennifer Walsh strode into the sanctuary like a conquering army, her designer heels clicking against the wooden floor, followed by a small army of photographers with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. The peaceful sanctity of my wedding was instantly transformed into chaos and confusion. Jennifer commanded attention with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room she entered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in a voice that carried easily through the suddenly silent sanctuary, "I'm afraid this wedding is based on a rather significant deception. The groom you know as Andy Mitchell is actually Andrew Mitchell, CEO and founder of Mitchell Technologies, with a personal net worth of over $3 billion. Her words hit the congregation like a physical blow, and I could hear gasps and confused murmurs rippling through the pews. My own world began spinning as I tried to process what she was saying. The cameras kept flashing, capturing every moment of shock and confusion on the faces of my family and friends. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of horrible mistake or cruel joke. But the satisfied smile on Jennifer's face told me that every word was deliberately calculated to destroy this moment. The questions came at me like bullets from every direction. "Miss Clark, did you know about your fiancé's real identity? How long have you been planning this deception? What's it like to trick one of America's richest men? Are you marrying him for his money?" The flashing cameras were blinding, and the shouted questions overlapped into a cacophony of accusation and invasion. I stood frozen in my wedding dress, unable to comprehend how my perfect day had become this nightmare of chaos and humiliation. The reporters pressed closer, shoving microphones in my face, their questions becoming more aggressive and insulting. "How does it feel to be exposed as a gold digger? Did you research his wealth before seducing him? What's your response to allegations that this entire relationship was a calculated con?" I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't even breathe properly as my private life was dissected and destroyed in front of everyone I loved. Through the chaos, I saw Andrew fighting his way toward me, his face a mask of anguish and desperation. "Madison," he called out, trying to reach me through the crowd of reporters and photographers. "Let me explain. Please, just let me explain." But his words were lost in the shouting, and all I could focus on was the confirmation of everything Jennifer had said. He wasn't denying his real identity. He was just trying to reach me. The man I was about to marry, the man I had shared my deepest secrets and dreams with, the man I had trusted completely, was indeed a billionaire who had been lying to me for months. Everything I thought I knew about him was false. Every conversation, every tender moment, every promise, all of it built on deception. As he got closer, I could see the guilt and terror in his eyes, and I realized that some part of him had always known this day would come. "Stay away from me," I managed to whisper, then louder, "Stay away from me." The hurt in my voice cut through some of the noise, and Andrew stopped moving toward me, his hands outstretched in a gesture of pleading. "Madison, please," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I can explain everything. Yes, I lied about who I am, but everything else was real. My feelings for you, my love, that was never a lie." But his words only made the betrayal feel deeper and more complete. How could he claim to love me while building our entire relationship on such a massive deception? How could he let me plan our wedding, introduce him to my grandmother, share my body and soul with him, all while knowing he was living a complete lie? The cameras captured every moment of my heartbreak, every tear that fell, every word of our private pain, now public entertainment. The people who had come to celebrate with us were now witnessing the destruction of everything they thought they knew. Grandma Grace stood like a protective lioness, her usually gentle face fierce with anger at the invasion of our sacred space. Tom from the auto shop looked confused and hurt, probably wondering if he had somehow been used as part of Andrew's deception. The church ladies who had spent weeks preparing food and decorations for our reception looked devastated, their generous efforts now seeming foolish in the face of this massive lie. Pastor Williams was trying to restore some order, asking the reporters to leave and respect the sanctity of the church, but they ignored him completely. These good people who had opened their hearts to welcome Andrew into our community were now learning that everything had been false, and I felt responsible for bringing this humiliation and chaos into their peaceful lives. I couldn't bear another second of the cameras, the questions, the violation of everything sacred about this day. Gathering my wedding dress in my hands, I ran from the sanctuary, pushing past reporters and photographers who continued to follow me with their equipment. "Madison, wait." Andrew called behind me, but I couldn't stop. The beautiful spring morning now felt like a mockery as I ran from the church where I had expected to become a wife and instead became a public spectacle. Behind me, I could hear the chaos continuing. Andrew probably trying to address the media, Grandma Grace defending me to anyone who would listen, and the relentless clicking of camera shutters capturing every moment of my humiliation. My wedding dress, which had made me feel like a princess just an hour earlier, now felt like a costume in a cruel play where I was the unwitting fool. As I reached my car, I could see that the media circus was even larger than I had realized. News vans with satellite dishes were already broadcasting live reports from outside our little church. I heard fragments of commentary as I fumbled with my keys. Shocking revelation about tech billionaire Andrew Mitchell, small-town mechanic who apparently had no idea. One of the most elaborate romantic deceptions in recent memory. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely start the engine, and even as I drove away, I could see in my rearview mirror that some of the reporters were following me. My private life, my love story, my most intimate moments. Everything was now public entertainment, dissected and analyzed by strangers who would never understand the real people behind the headlines. As the church disappeared behind me, I realized that the woman who had woken up that morning ready to become Mrs. Andrew Mitchell no longer existed. She had been destroyed by cameras and questions and the devastating truth about the man she thought she knew. The days following the wedding disaster blurred together in a haze of humiliation and heartbreak. I barely left my apartment, unable to face the outside world that now knew my most private business. Newspapers and magazines had picked up the story, each with more sensational headlines than the last. Billionaire's wedding day hoax, small-town gold digger exposed, the mechanic who almost conned a CEO. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting interviews, tabloid journalists offering money for my side of the story, and talk show producers promising to tell the real truth. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking social media, stopped looking at the news. But the stories kept coming anyway, each one painting me as either a calculated con artist or a naive fool. Neither version felt like the real me, but apparently the real me didn't matter anymore. The scandal devastated Sullivan's auto repair in ways I never could have anticipated. Within a week, we had lost more than half our regular customers. People who had trusted me to work on their cars for years suddenly found excuses to go elsewhere. Tom tried to be supportive, assuring me that the storm would pass, but I could see the worry lines deepening around his eyes as appointment after appointment was canceled. Maybe I should just quit, I told him one particularly difficult morning when only 2 customers had shown up. "This is destroying your business, Tom. You don't deserve this because of my poor judgment." But Tom shook his head firmly. "Madison Clark, you've been like a daughter to me for 10 years. I'm not going to abandon you now because some rich folks and their media friends decided to make you a villain. We'll get through this together." The cyberbullying was relentless and creative in its cruelty. Memes featuring my shocked face from the wedding day spread across social media platforms with captions like, "When you realize your sugar daddy is actually Daddy Warbucks," and "Small-town girl learns big city lessons." Comment sections were filled with strangers analyzing every aspect of my appearance, my background, my family, my intelligence. Some people defended me, arguing that I was clearly a victim of Andrew's deception, but their voices were drowned out by the chorus of those convinced I was either a gold digger or an idiot. The worst part was how personal and vicious the attacks became. People found my old social media photos and created elaborate theories about my long-term plan to seduce a billionaire. They dissected every outfit I'd ever worn, every restaurant Andrew and I had visited, every facial expression captured in the wedding day photos, looking for evidence of my supposed deception. Grandma Grace remained my constant source of strength during those dark weeks. She would sit with me in the same church pew where I had found her praying the morning after the wedding disaster, her weathered hand holding mine as she shared wisdom earned through decades of life's trials. "Madison, sweetheart," she said gently, "I've watched you grow from a heartbroken 16-year-old into a strong, independent woman. Don't let these strangers and their ugly words make you forget who you really are. You love that man with an honest heart, and there's no shame in that, even if he didn't deserve it." Her faith remained unshakable even as mine wavered. "God sees the truth of what happened here," she assured me, "and he sees your heart. That's what matters, not what these people with their cameras and cruel words think they know about you." The reaction from our church community was painfully divided. While many members rallied around me with love and support, others seemed to believe the media narrative that I had somehow been involved in deceiving Andrew or that I should have known better. I could feel eyes on me during Sunday services, hear whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by, sense the speculation about what I had really known about Andrew's identity. Mrs. Patterson, who had made our wedding cake, was particularly cold, acting as if I had personally betrayed her generosity by allowing her to contribute to what the media was calling the most elaborate romantic fraud in recent memory. The division in our small church community added another layer of pain to an already overwhelming situation. These are people who had known me since childhood, who had watched me grow up, overcome tragedy, and build a decent life. Yet some of them were now questioning my character based on headlines written by strangers. While I was struggling with public humiliation, Andrew was fighting his own battles in the aftermath of our destroyed wedding. Unknown to me, he was using every resource at his disposal to try to protect me from the worst of the media attention. His legal team was working around the clock to threaten lawsuits against publications that printed false information about me, to shut down websites spreading particularly vicious lies, and to pursue criminal charges against people making direct threats. He hired a crisis management firm to try to control the narrative, pushing stories that emphasized his deception rather than any wrongdoing on my part. But the damage was already done, and the internet's appetite for scandal seemed insatiable. Every day brought new articles, new theories, new ways for strangers to dissect and judge our private relationship. Andrew was discovering that even unlimited wealth and powerful lawyers couldn't undo the consequences of his lies. Marcus watched his best friend spiral into guilt and desperation as Andrew threw himself into protecting me from afar. "You need to respect her wishes and stay away," Marcus warned during one of their strategy sessions. "I know you want to fix this, but your presence in her life right now will only make things worse. The best thing you can do for Madison is give her space and time to heal." But Andrew couldn't accept that his actions had permanently destroyed our relationship. He spent hours crafting letters he never sent, practicing speeches he would never give, and researching ways to make amends for a betrayal this massive. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he would say repeatedly. "I just wanted to be loved for who I really am, not what I can provide." Marcus would remind him that the road to hell was paved with good intentions, and that Madison was the one paying the price for his selfish choices. The financial impact of the scandal hit me harder than I had expected. Not only was I losing income due to the decline in business at the auto shop, but I was also facing unexpected expenses related to the media attention. I needed to change my phone number, consider moving to a new apartment, and even consult with a lawyer about some of the more threatening messages I was receiving. The wedding expenses, which Andrew had insisted on paying for, were now a source of additional humiliation. I felt like I owed money to vendors and church members who had contributed their time and resources to what everyone now knew was a sham. The engagement ring, worth more than I made in several years, sat in my jewelry box like a beautiful, cursed reminder of how thoroughly I had been deceived. I couldn't bring myself to wear it, but I also couldn't decide what to do with something so valuable that represented such painful memories. After 3 weeks of isolation and despair, Grandma Grace convinced me to seek professional counseling to help process the trauma of such public betrayal and humiliation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, no relation to Andrew, thankfully, was a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from public scandals and media harassment. What you've experienced is a form of psychological assault, she explained during our first session. Having your private life dissected and judged by millions of strangers is not something humans are equipped to handle naturally. You're not weak for struggling with this. You're having a normal response to an extremely abnormal situation. Her words were the first validation I had received that my pain was legitimate, that I wasn't being overly sensitive or dramatic. For the first time since the wedding disaster, I began to hope that I might eventually heal from this experience. As the immediate shock began to fade, I started the long process of rebuilding my sense of self and my faith in God's plan. Grandma Grace and I spent hours praying together, asking for strength to forgive, not just Andrew, but also the strangers who had been so cruel, and even myself for being deceived. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay, Grace reminded me. It means you're choosing not to let bitterness poison your heart. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see that this experience, as devastating as it was, might teach me things about resilience, self-worth, and the difference between genuine love and comfortable deception. I wasn't ready to forgive Andrew yet, wasn't ready to consider that his feelings for me might have been genuine despite his lies. But I was beginning to believe that I would survive this, that I would rebuild my life, and that maybe someday I would even be grateful for the painful lessons this experience was teaching me about discernment and the true nature of love. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Tom Sullivan called me into his office with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Madison, I need to show you something that might be difficult to understand," he said, spreading several financial documents across his desk. "For the past 8 months, we've been receiving payments from anonymous clients, high-end car restorations, specialty work orders, consulting fees for automotive projects. I thought it was just good fortune, new business from word-of-mouth referrals. As I examined the paperwork, my heart began to race. The timing of these lucrative contracts coincided exactly with when I had started dating Andrew. "Tom," I whispered, "these aren't real customers, are they?" He shook his head slowly. "I think your Andrew has been secretly supporting the shop long before anyone knew about his real identity. These payments kept us afloat during slow periods, allowed us to upgrade equipment, even covered some of your grandmother's medical bills last winter." Tom's revelation sent me on a mission to uncover the full extent of Andrew's secret assistance. At the medical billing office where Grandma Grace had been treated for pneumonia 6 months earlier, I requested detailed payment records. What I discovered left me speechless. An anonymous benefactor had covered the entire cost of her hospitalization, follow-up treatments, and prescription medications. The bills, which would have bankrupted our modest family, had been quietly paid in full within days of her admission. "We assumed it was some kind of charitable foundation," the billing clerk explained. "Anonymous medical debt relief isn't uncommon, but the speed and completeness of this payment was unusual." As I sat in my car outside the medical center, staring at the payment records, I realized that Andrew had been taking care of my family long before our relationship became romantic, long before he had any guarantee that I would ever love him back. Still reeling from these discoveries, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. I contacted Marcus, Andrew's lawyer and best friend. When I arrived at his downtown office, Marcus looked surprised but not unwelcoming. "Madison," he said carefully, "I'm glad you came. There are things about Andrew's feelings for you that I think you need to understand." Over the next hour, Marcus painted a picture of Andrew that was completely different from the calculating deceiver I had imagined. "Before he met you, Andrew was the most cynical person I knew," Marcus explained. "Every relationship he'd ever had was with women who wanted his money, his status, his connections. He told me once that he'd never met anyone who loved him for himself rather than what he could provide. That's why he lied about his identity. Not to deceive you, but because he was desperate to experience genuine love for the first time in his life." Marcus continued sharing details about Andrew's past that helped me understand the depth of his insecurities and longing for authentic connection. His last serious relationship was with Jennifer Walsh. "You met her at your wedding," Marcus said with obvious distaste. "She was with him for 2 years, and Andrew discovered she was secretly planning to leverage their relationship into business deals for her family's company. Before that, there was Catherine Morrison, who tried to sell photos of their private moments to tabloid magazines. And before her, Amanda Richardson, who was gathering information for a tell-all book about dating billionaires. As Marcus recounted story after story of betrayal and exploitation, I began to understand why Andrew had been so terrified to reveal his true identity. When he talked about you, Madison, it was the first time I'd ever seen him believe that someone could love him unconditionally. That's why he couldn't bear to risk losing you by telling the truth. Marcus shared more intimate details about Andrew's behavior during our relationship that painted a picture of a man genuinely transformed by love. He would call me after your dates, Madison, talking for hours about conversations you'd had, things you'd taught him about cars, stories you'd shared about your grandmother. I'd never heard him talk about anyone the way he talked about you. Marcus paused, studying my face. He started changing his entire lifestyle to match the man he was pretending to be. He moved out of his penthouse into a modest apartment, bought simple clothes, learned to appreciate small pleasures he'd never noticed before. It wasn't just an act for you. He was becoming the person he thought you deserved, the person he wanted to be. These revelations were shifting my understanding of everything that had happened between us, making me question assumptions I'd held for months. Marcus then showed me the extensive measures Andrew had taken to protect me from the media storm following our wedding disaster. He spent more money trying to shield you from this scandal than most people make in a lifetime, Marcus explained, spreading legal documents across the conference table. Cease and desist orders to over 200 websites and publications, criminal complaints against people making threats, private security firms monitoring your apartment and grandmother's house, crisis management experts working to control the narrative. I was shocked by the scope of Andrew's protective efforts. He hired bodyguards? I asked, incredulous. Marcus nodded. You probably never saw them, but there have been security professionals ensuring your safety since the day after the wedding. Andrew was terrified that his world's attention on you might put you in real danger. The realization that Andrew had been protecting me even while I hated him added another layer of complexity to my feelings. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by all the evidence of Andrew's secret care and protection, trying to reconcile this new information with the anger and betrayal I had been carrying for months. The man Marcus had described, lonely, insecure, desperate for genuine love, seemed completely different from the calculating deceiver I had imagined. But did his reasons for lying make the deception any less harmful? Did his genuine feelings justify the elaborate charade he had constructed? I found myself remembering moments from our relationship with new understanding. His surprise and delight at simple pleasures, his apparent amazement at Grace's unconditional acceptance, his emotional reaction to the warmth of our church community. Had those responses been genuine expressions of a man experiencing real love and belonging for the first time? Or was I just making excuses for someone who had fundamentally violated my trust? I shared everything Marcus had told me with Grandma Grace, desperately needing her wisdom to help process these new revelations. As we sat in her familiar kitchen, the same place where Andrew had charmed our family months earlier, Grace listened carefully to every detail. Madison, she said finally, I told you before that I could see secrets in that man's eyes, but I also told you that I could see genuine love. Both things were true. She paused, choosing her words carefully. His deception was wrong. There's no question about that. But love makes people do foolish things, especially when they're scared of losing something precious. The question you need to ask yourself isn't whether what he did was right or wrong. You already know it was wrong. The question is whether his love for you is real, and whether that real love is worth forgiveness and a second chance. I spent hours in prayer at the church where our wedding should have taken place, asking God for guidance in navigating this impossible situation. The sanctuary where I had experienced such joy and then such humiliation now felt like a place of potential healing and decision. As I knelt in the same pew where Grandma Grace had taught me about forgiveness, I found myself remembering Andrew's tears when I had shown him this sacred space, his genuine emotion when talking about spending forever with me, his respectful interaction with every member of our community. Had I been so focused on the lie about his identity that I had missed the truth about his character? Was it possible that the man I had fallen in love with was real, even if his name and background are false? I prayed for the wisdom to know the difference between love and deception, between forgiveness and foolishness, between second chances and setting myself up for more pain. As the weeks passed and I processed everything Marcus had revealed, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Andrew. The expensive engagement ring, which I had kept hidden in my jewelry box like evidence of my own gullibility, now seemed like a symbol of something more complex. Had Andrew chosen it because he wanted to impress me with his wealth, or because he wanted to give me something beautiful to express the depth of his feelings? When I looked at the ring now, I didn't just see the reminder of his deception. I also remembered the genuine emotion in his voice when he proposed, the way his hand shook as he slipped it onto my finger, the tears in his eyes as he promised to love me forever. Maybe the ring, like our entire relationship, contained both truth and lies, genuine feeling and fundamental deception. The question was whether I could separate the two, whether I could find a way to honor what had been real while addressing what had been false. For the first time since the wedding disaster, I was beginning to consider the possibility that our story might not be over. 4 months after the wedding disaster, my world was shaken again when Grandma Grace collapsed at home and was rushed to Austin General Hospital. The doctors diagnosed her with severe pneumonia that had progressed into respiratory complications, the same condition that had hospitalized her months earlier when Andrew had secretly paid her medical bills. As I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her fragile hand and listening to her labored breathing, I felt the familiar terror of potentially losing the most important person in my life. Grace had been my anchor through every storm, my source of wisdom and unconditional love. The thought of facing the world without her guidance felt unbearable. "Don't you dare leave me, Grandma," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I still need you. I still need your wisdom to figure out this mess my life has become." I spent 3 days practically living in the hospital waiting room, catching brief naps in uncomfortable chairs, and surviving on vending machine coffee and cafeteria sandwiches. Tom from the auto shop brought me clean clothes and checked on Grace's condition, but mostly I was alone with my fear and exhaustion. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but Grace's age made her recovery uncertain. During those long, sleepless hours, I found myself thinking about Andrew more than I had in months. Grace had always been the bridge between us, the person who had immediately welcomed him into our family, who had seen something special in him from the very beginning. If I lost her now, I would lose not only my grandmother, but also the one person who might help me understand whether forgiveness was possible, whether love could survive such massive deception. On the 4th day, as I was walking back from the cafeteria with my 3rd cup of terrible coffee, I saw a familiar figure at the end of the hospital corridor. Andrew stood there uncertainly, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind Grace grew in her garden, the same ones that had decorated our ruined wedding. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the distance, and I could see the pain and longing in his eyes. He looked different, thinner, older somehow, as if the months since our wedding had aged him years. His expensive suits had been replaced by simple jeans and a plain shirt, making him look more like the Andy I had fallen in love with. When he saw me notice him, he took a tentative step forward, his entire posture asking permission to approach. Despite everything that had happened between us, my first instinct was relief that he was there, that I wouldn't have to face this crisis completely alone. "I heard about Grace," Andrew said quietly as we stood outside her room. "Marcus told me she was hospitalized. I know you don't want to see me, and I'll leave if you ask me to, but I couldn't stay away when she's sick. She was so kind to me, Madison. She welcomed me into your family when I didn't deserve it." His voice broke slightly on the last words, and I could see genuine anguish in his expression. Despite my anger and hurt, I found myself stepping aside to let him enter Grace's room. When he saw her lying there, small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, he moved to her bedside with obvious emotion. "Mrs. Clark," he whispered, even though she was sleeping, "I'm so sorry for all the pain I've caused your granddaughter. I'm sorry for disrupting your family with my lies. But I want you to know that every moment I spent with you was real and precious to me." When Grace woke up and saw Andrew sitting beside her bed, her face lit up with genuine joy despite her illness. "Andrew," she said, her voice weak but warm, "I knew you'd come. I've been praying for you, son." The word son seemed to break something inside him, and I watched as tears began flowing down his face. "Mrs. Clark, I lied to you about everything," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't deserve your kindness or your prayers." But Grace reached out with her frail hand and touched his face gently. "You lied about your name and your job," she said softly, "but you didn't lie about your heart. I saw how you loved my Madison, how you treated me like real family, how you respected our church and our community. That wasn't deception, Andrew. That was the real you finally being allowed to come out." Grace turned her attention to me, her eyes moving between Andrew and me with the wisdom of someone who had loved deeply and forgiven much. "Madison, sweetheart," she said, "I'm an old woman, and I've seen enough of life to know that perfect love is rare and precious. This man hurt you with his deception, yes, but he also loved you with everything he had. Look at him now. He's not the billionaire CEO the newspapers write about. He's just a man who's terrified of losing the woman he loves." She paused to catch her breath, then continued, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing love over bitterness, hope over fear. You two found something beautiful together, even if it started with lies. The question is whether you're brave enough to build something true on that foundation." Later that evening, Andrew and I found ourselves in the hospital chapel, sitting in silence as we processed Grace's words. Finally, Andrew broke the quiet with the honesty I had been waiting months to hear. "Madison, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," he said, staring at his hands. "I know that lying to you for months was unforgivable, no matter what my reasons were. But I need you to understand that falling in love with you changed everything for me. Before I met you, I had never experienced unconditional love, never felt accepted for who I really am rather than what I can provide. That first day at the auto shop, when you looked at me like I was just a regular person worth talking to, it was like breathing fresh air for the first time in my life." His voice was raw with emotion as he continued. "I kept lying because I was terrified that the real Andrew Mitchell would destroy what we had built together. For the first time since our wedding day disaster, I found myself really listening to Andrew's explanation without the filter of anger and betrayal. "I understand why you lied," I said slowly, "and I can even understand why you kept lying. But Andrew, don't you see how your deception affected me? I fell in love with a man who didn't exist. I planned a future with someone who was fundamentally different from who I thought he was. Even if your feelings were real, how can I trust anything about our relationship when it was built on such a massive lie?" Andrew nodded, tears streaming down his face. "You're absolutely right," he said. "I was so focused on my own fear of rejection that I didn't consider how my lies would make you feel when the truth came out. I robbed you of the chance to love me knowing who I really am. I made the choice for both of us, and that was selfish and wrong." On Grace's final night in the hospital before being released, she called Andrew and me to her bedside for what felt like a final blessing. Her color was better, her breathing easier, but something in her manner suggested she had important words to share. "I want you both to listen to an old woman who has loved deeply and lost much," she said, holding both our hands. "Perfect love casts out fear, but fear can also cast out perfect love if you let it. Andrew, your fear of rejection made you lie. Madison, your fear of being deceived again is making you close your heart to forgiveness. Both fears are understandable, but neither will lead you to the happiness God wants for you." She squeezed our hands tighter. "I may not have many years left, and I want to see my granddaughter happy before I go. You two found something precious together. Don't let pride and hurt destroy it completely." As dawn broke over the hospital, Andrew and I sat talking quietly while Grace slept peacefully nearby. Something had shifted during our long night of honest conversation. Not complete forgiveness or reconciliation, but the beginning of understanding. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I told him honestly. "And I don't know if I can ever feel secure in a relationship that started with such deception. But I do believe now that your feelings for me were real, and I believe that you never intended to hurt me the way you did." Andrew nodded, hope and sadness mixing in his expression. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness," he said. "I just want the chance to prove to you who I really am, without lies or deception. I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes years." As we watched Grace sleeping, surrounded by the wildflowers Andrew had brought, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The possibility that love might be stronger than deception, that forgiveness might be more powerful than fear. 6 weeks after Grace's recovery from the hospital, Andrew and I began the slow, careful process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. We started with counseling sessions together, meeting twice a week with Dr. Sarah Mitchell to work through the complex layers of trust, forgiveness, and genuine love that existed beneath the deception. Pastor Williams also agreed to meet with us, helping us explore what it meant to forgive and be forgiven in the context of faith and commitment. Redemption is possible for any relationship, Pastor Williams told us, but it requires complete transparency, genuine repentance, and the willingness to do the hard work of rebuilding trust brick by brick. Andrew listened to every word with the intensity of a man who understood he was being given a second chance he didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. Our conversations during those weeks were unlike anything we had shared during our original relationship. This time, there were no secrets, no carefully constructed personas, no fear of judgment based on social status or wealth. Andrew told me about his lonely childhood, raised by nannies while his parents built their business empire. He shared his experiences of being used for his money, his cynical view of relationships, and his genuine amazement at finding unconditional love in our small Austin community. "When your grandmother hugged me that first Sunday dinner," he said, "it was the first time in my adult life that someone had shown me affection without wanting anything in return. I didn't even know how to process that kind of genuine warmth. I began to understand that the man I had fallen in love with wasn't a character Andrew had created. He was the person Andrew became when he finally felt safe to be vulnerable and authentic." After 3 months of counseling, honest conversations, and rebuilt trust, Andrew and I decided to have the wedding we should have had the first time: small, intimate, and built on complete truth. This time, our guest list included only the people who truly mattered: Grandma Grace, Tom and his wife, Pastor Williams, Marcus, and a handful of close friends who had supported us through the scandal and reconciliation. There were no cameras, no media attention, no elaborate displays of wealth. Andrew wore a simple suit he had bought specifically for this occasion, and I wore a modest dress that felt more authentic to who I really was. As we exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising transparency, forgiveness, and the courage to love despite fear, I felt the peace that had been missing from our original wedding day. True to his promise to use his wealth meaningfully, Andrew established the Grace Clark Memorial Scholarship Program for young people interested in automotive careers. Named after my grandmother, who had taught me that honest work honors God, the program provided full funding for technical education, apprenticeships with established mechanics, and mentorship opportunities with industry professionals. The announcement event was held at our church fellowship hall, the same space where our original wedding reception should have been. "My wife taught me that the most valuable work isn't necessarily the most lucrative," Andrew told the gathered crowd of students, parents, and local business owners. "Skills like Madison's, the ability to diagnose problems, work with your hands, and serve your community, are the foundation of a strong society. This program honors that wisdom." Tom's auto repair shop underwent a remarkable transformation, becoming the Austin Center for Automotive Excellence. With Andrew's financial backing, but my vision guiding the expansion, We created a state-of-the-art training facility that combined Tom's decades of practical experience with modern equipment and methods. The center provided free automotive education to underserved communities, offered continuing education for experienced mechanics, and served as a model for similar programs across Texas. I remained actively involved in the day-to-day operations, teaching classes, and working on customer vehicles because I loved the work and believed in its importance. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy Tom's business had ultimately led to its greatest growth and impact. One of the most beautiful aspects of our new life together was watching Andrew discover the joy of hands-on work. He spent several hours each week at the automotive center, not as the wealthy benefactor, but as a student learning alongside the scholarship recipients. His soft hands became callous from working with tools. His expensive wardrobe was replaced by practical work clothes, and his days included the simple satisfaction of diagnosing and fixing mechanical problems. I never understood the pleasure of creating something tangible, he told me one evening as we cleaned up after a particularly challenging engine rebuild. Spending my days moving money and making deals always felt abstract. But when we get an old car running again, when we teach someone a skill that will support their family, that feels real and meaningful. He had found the authentic purpose that had been missing from his privileged life. Our life together was beautifully ordinary in the way Andrew had always craved but never experienced. We lived in a modest house near the automotive center, close enough to Grace that we could have Sunday dinners together and help her with daily tasks as her health required. Andrew delighted in these simple family traditions, helping Grace tend her garden, fixing household repairs, participating in church committees, and being part of a community that valued him for his contributions rather than his wealth. This is what I was searching for my entire life, he told me one Sunday evening as we sat on the porch swing where he had first told me he loved me. Not the excitement of wealth or power, but the peace of belonging somewhere, being needed by people who know all your flaws and love you anyway. The scholarship program's first graduates began finding excellent jobs throughout Austin and beyond, creating a ripple effect of skilled workers who carried forward the values of honest work and community service that Grace had instilled in me. Maria Santos opened her own repair shop specializing in hybrid vehicles. James Washington became the youngest certified master mechanic in Travis County. Lisa Chun developed innovative diagnostic techniques that other shops began adopting across the region. Each success story felt like a vindication of the painful journey Andrew and I had traveled together. Proof that something beautiful and lasting could grow from the ashes of deception and public humiliation. Grace would be so proud, I told Andrew as we watched the latest group of graduates receive their certifications. She always believed that love multiplies when you share it. 5 years after our second wedding, as I watched Andrew teaching a group of teenagers how to change brake pads, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this point. The scandal that had once felt like the end of our world had ultimately led to a more authentic, meaningful life than either of us could have imagined. Andrew had discovered that his greatest wealth wasn't his bank account, but his capacity for genuine love and service. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting pain, but choosing to build something better from its lessons. Our relationship was stronger because it had been tested by truth, rebuilt on honesty, and grounded in shared values rather than shared deceptions. The simple life we had created together was richer than any fantasy either of us had originally dreamed. As I stand here today, telling you this story, I want you to know that God truly can work through the most impossible circumstances to create something beautiful. Andrew and I learned that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to build something true with someone imperfect. Our story began with deception, was nearly destroyed by public humiliation, but ultimately became a testament to the power of forgiveness, second chances, and the courage to love despite fear. The Automotive Center continues to thrive, training hundreds of young people who might never have had these opportunities. Grace lived to see her 92nd birthday, surrounded by the family she had helped heal through her wisdom and unconditional love. And Andrew and I, we're still here, still working together, still discovering new ways to serve our community and honor the love that survived everything thrown against it. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever had to choose between bitterness and forgiveness? Share your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more stories that prove love can conquer all, even the deepest deceptions and most painful betrayals. 3 months into our relationship, Andy and I had reached a depth of connection I'd never experienced before. We would spend hours talking about everything: our childhood dreams, our fears about the future, our deepest beliefs about faith and family. One evening, sitting on Grandma Grace's porch swing, Andy opened up about his loneliness before meeting me. "I've been searching for something real my whole life," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Most relationships I've had felt shallow, like people were interested in what I could provide rather than who I actually am. But with you, Madison, I feel like I can finally be myself." I started having dreams about marrying Andy. Not the elaborate fantasy weddings some women dream of, but simple, meaningful ceremonies in Grandma Grace's church, surrounded by the people who mattered most. I would catch myself imagining what our children might look like, what kind of father he would be, how we would grow old together in Austin. During lunch breaks, I found myself lingering by jewelry store windows, wondering what kind of ring he might choose, hoping he was thinking about our future as seriously as I was. My dreams were so beautifully simple: expanding Tom's auto shop when he retired, maybe opening a small garage of our own, raising children who understood the value of honest work and genuine love. I had no idea that the man I was planning this modest future with was worth more money than our entire neighborhood combined. Meanwhile, Andy was struggling with his own wedding dreams and a massive deception that would have to be revealed. He had already chosen an engagement ring, a stunning diamond that cost more than most people's annual salary. But every time he imagined proposing, he was haunted by the knowledge that our entire relationship was built on lies. He would sit in his office, staring at business contracts worth millions of dollars, while his heart ached for the simple honesty of our conversations over coffee and pie. The irony was crushing. He had everything money could buy, but the one thing he wanted most was the genuine love of a woman who believed he was someone completely different. He knew he should tell me the truth, but the fear of losing me paralyzed him completely. And he started spending more time at the auto shop, not just as a customer, but as someone who genuinely wanted to understand my world. He would arrive with coffee and pastries, then watch me work with fascination that seemed completely authentic. "Teach me something," he'd say, and I would show him how to change oil, replace spark plugs, or diagnose engine problems by sound. His hands were soft, clearly not used to manual labor, but he was eager to learn and never complained about getting dirty. Tom joked that Andy was becoming our unpaid apprentice, but I loved having him there. It felt like we were building something together, sharing the work that defined so much of who I was. I had no idea he was memorizing every detail of my world because he was terrified of losing access to it. Our relationship deepened into comfortable domesticity. Andy would come over after work, and we would cook simple dinners together in my tiny kitchen. He seemed to genuinely enjoy these quiet evenings, helping me prepare meals with ingredients from the local grocery store, watching old movies on my secondhand couch, falling asleep together while reading or talking. He fit so perfectly into my modest lifestyle that I never questioned his contentment with such simplicity. What I didn't know was that these evenings represented everything he'd been missing in his real life: authentic connection, peaceful quiet, and the simple joy of being loved for who he was rather than what he possessed. These humble moments in my small apartment were the most precious hours of his entire week. Unknown to me, Andy's best friend Marcus was growing increasingly concerned about the deception. As Andrew's lawyer and closest confidant, Marcus knew about our relationship and was watching his friend fall deeper into an impossible situation. "You have to tell her the truth," Marcus would argue during their private meetings. "The longer you wait, the worse this is going to be. She deserves to know who she's really dating." But Andrew would always find excuses. The timing wasn't right. He needed just a little more time. He was afraid of destroying the most genuine relationship he'd ever had. Marcus could see that his friend was genuinely in love, but he also knew that lies of this magnitude never stayed hidden forever. The foundation of their relationship was cracking, even if Madison couldn't see it yet. Andrew was living a double life that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. During the day, he would attend board meetings, make decisions involving millions of dollars, and manage a technology empire that employed thousands of people. But his heart wasn't in any of it anymore. All he could think about was getting back to Madison's world. The honest conversations, the genuine laughter, the simple pleasure of being loved without agenda. He would sit in expensive restaurants during business dinners, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, and all he could think about was Madison's homemade spaghetti and the way she hummed while she cooked. The contrast between his two worlds was becoming unbearable, but he was trapped by his own deception and his terror of losing the only real love he'd ever known. One night in early spring, Andy suggested we drive out to the hill country to look at the stars. We lay in the back of my pickup truck, sharing a blanket and pointing out constellations in the clear Texas sky. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he whispered, his voice filled with such raw emotion that it made my heart race. "I know we haven't been together very long, but I've never been more certain of anything. You're everything I've been searching for, Madison. You make me want to be the best version of myself." As shooting stars streaked across the darkness above us, I felt like God was confirming what my heart already knew. This man was my future, my destiny, my answered prayer. I had no idea that those same stars were witnessing the most elaborate deception of love in my lifetime. Grandma Grace, with her decades of wisdom and keen intuition, was the only person who sensed something wasn't quite right about Andy. "There's something he's not telling you," she said to me one afternoon while we worked in her garden. "I'm not saying he's a bad man. I can see that he loves you genuinely. But there are secrets behind those eyes, Madison. Big ones." I defended him, explaining that everyone has private aspects of their past, that he was probably just naturally reserved. But Grace shook her head slowly, her weathered hands still among the tomato plants. "I've seen a lot of people in my 72 years, sweetheart. That man is carrying a burden heavier than you realize. I just pray that when the truth comes out, your love will be strong enough to survive it." Her words planted a seed of unease that I tried desperately to ignore. On a perfect Saturday evening in April, Annie took me to our favorite spot by Town Lake, where we'd shared our first real conversation months earlier. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of wildflowers. When he suddenly dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box, my entire world stopped. "Madison Clark," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you've shown me what real love looks like. You've made me believe in forever. Will you marry me?" The ring was absolutely stunning, far more expensive than anything I'd ever expected, but all I could see was the love shining in his eyes. Through tears of pure joy, I said yes, throwing my arms around this wonderful man who had somehow chosen me. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt like the luckiest woman alive, completely unaware that I was accepting a proposal from one of the wealthiest men in America, who still hadn't told me his real name.